Today, we're going to talk about three things that you need for a truly great relationship. Not just a good relationship, a great relationship.
We recently saw a reel by Simon Sinek and being interviewed by Stephen Bartlett, the Diary of CEO. And Simon's obviously a very bright guy, and he laid out three pillars of what, in his mind, constitutes a really great relationship. And as relationship experts and students, we seem to agree.
That's right. Yeah. So we wanted to chat about those, see how they apply in real life, and give them a go. So the first is the idea that a great relationship requires intellectual compatibility. So the idea that, intellectual compatibility, you're able to learn together, you want to learn together, grow together, a willingness to explore ideas and be open to
And
new ones.
teach and learn, teach and learn. So, like, you're willing to share what you've recently consumed, whether that's a podcast or a book or an article that you've learned from, and then you want to teach your partner about it. So there's this like wavelength of intellectual stimulation and capability, whereas, lots of couples, are going to be on different wavelengths in that way. And it's really, I think, imperative to have a great relationship that you guys are synced up intellectually, because then you're able to discuss ideas and thoughts and concepts and teach and learn from each other in a way that makes sense and has a lot of synergy.
Yeah, yeah, and we often find that, with us, we'll enjoy a podcast on our own or an article or something that we came across and want to share it with one another and say, hey, this was really interesting. I see the way this plays out, or, that's kind of odd. Do you agree with that? Do you like
Hmm.
that?
Yeah.
So having those levels of conversation and don't get me wrong, it's not all the time. In fact, we actually have had some conversations about putting up some like boundaries, like, hey, we can't talk about AI before we go to bed, like at some level, we've got to figure out how we, check some of those ideas at
Yeah.
the door at certain times.
Yeah. But this idea of like exchange of ideas, I think like a willingness and engaging on mental exercises and thoughts and ideas and being able to debate and share different perspectives, I think makes for a really rich, like mental, intellectual component of a great relationship.
Yeah, yeah. So like when we're on point, if we go have dinner somewhere or, a glass of wine, to, bar top or something, some of the conversation might be about something that we're learning or sharing with one another. That's kind of a cool intellectual, life, social, relational, spiritual, emotional thing. And so, yeah, you want to have that for sure. So step one, a great intellectual connection or compatibility.
And the second thing he called out was an emotional compatibility. And so that one is maybe a little bit easier to think about of a willingness to show up and grow with one another in your emotional life and in your availability to find vulnerability with one another and to hold space for one another. I mean,
Yeah.
I can vulnerably share here that I give Mark a hard time sometimes that when I present him with an uncomfortable emotion of mine, like I'm upset or I'm pissed or I'm stressed, like sometimes when he's not in health and unavailable, he kind of shuts down. And I think one of the keys for a great relationship is each partner having a pretty high threshold of being able to get comfortable with each other's uncomfortable emotions. So, like, that's a really big skill in terms of being available for the emotions that your partner is experiencing, expressing, and how do you grow together in that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly a baseline of empathy we want to be able to have, compassion, connection in those moments. But that goes to some of the other things we've talked about is as identifying what are our unique emotional and attachment styles.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, like, it's easy in relationship for different people to get flooded in certain ways, and depending on your attachment style, flooded might feel like I need to block off, I need to like not go there, which is my style and my default, when I'm kind of just like operating in my reactionary self. And so, again, the hope is there's a combination of the intellectual openness to exploring what are our attachment styles, and then in so doing, push or stretch or build those emotional muscles that for some of us, and frankly, I mean, I hate to say this like generically, but a lot of us guys are blocked.
Yeah, it's definitely harder for men. The emotional compatibility is much harder for men than women, just from the way we've been raised. I think the way we are truly, like, physiologically, like, just women are more wired for relationship connection, expressing of emotions, sharing of emotions. And men, whether it's nature or nurture, I mean, we know for sure nurture, boys have not been traditionally raised to show emotion, to be connected to that part of themselves even. I mean, that's what so many heterosexual couples are at such a disadvantage because the men, they don't even have a lot of reps on like their own emotions, like expressing their own emotions appropriately, sharing their own emotions. So it's really hard for them to then step into a marriage or relationship container and have to like hold space for someone else's emotion. They're like, I don't even know. I'm not even aware of my own emotions, let alone do I know how to express them appropriately. And that's where sometimes anger comes out a lot when it's really sadness or fear or other things. But for guys in particular, I think that's an easier go-to emotion because anger is like more appropriate and allowed as opposed to being scared or hurt or sad. And then that creates real problems for a relationship if anger is a guy's go-to emotion because it's maybe the only one he felt allowed to express, embody, whatever.
Yeah,
I
or
mean,
it's
do you
even
feel like you've
affirmed.
seen that?
What's even affirmed, for like, a guy to be like tough guy or strong, maybe less culturally today, but versus when I grew up, there was definitely a sense of like, yeah, to be the strong Rambo, like aggro guy was like totally affirmed. And that's just not emotional health. And
Yeah.
so, we've said before, as you and I have discussed kind of this path to intimacy and how do we truly
Hmm.
experience intimacy, intimacy absolutely requires vulnerability. So if we're emotionally blocked off and unable to be vulnerable, then we're not going to experience full intimacy. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, you've got
Do the
to limit
motions
that.
again. Do the motions. He
Well,
does
yeah.
this.
So it goes. I have to feel safe enough to open up, and so this is vulnerability. So I'm exposing myself in order to receive embrace and receive intimacy. But if
Mhm.
I'm, the opposite of vulnerability is guarded. If I'm guarded, if I'm standoffish, if I'm protecting myself, then I can never receive a hug. I can't receive a hug like this. I have to say I'm vulnerable. I'm exposing my heart and my
Mhm.
body to potential threat. That's part of it too. It's this idea of we block off because of perceived
Yeah.
threat. And so for some of us, emotions feel overwhelming and threatening. So we're unvulnerable. We are, defensive. We got to learn to let that go,
Mhm.
receive the embrace. It's all good.
I think another thing in this category of the emotional compatibility that I think, I mean, now as we're talking through it, this might be the hardest one, actually, I think, to find compatibility and a true connection that both parties feel like they're being able to show up in this aspect or dynamic of a relationship. Because I know, like, Melissa Wood talks about being an HSP, highly sensitive person. Like, I'm a highly sensitive person. And so sometimes I know for you, it's hard. You're not as sensitive. So I'll say, hey, babe, like, that really hurt my feelings when you did X, Y, or Z, or you said this thing. And you are literally like, what the hell? Like, are you joking? Like, that's not even a thing. Like, you can't be sad about that, or you can't be disappointed or stressed or whatever. And so, I think one of the phrases that's really good in talking about emotional compatibility is an ability or willingness to hold space for one another. And like, I get that that's a hard thing for you because I am a highly sensitive person. So things just affect me more and deeper maybe than most. So sometimes when I share, hey, this hurt my feelings or whatever, it's hard for you to not like roll your eyes hard enough, like far enough back in your head to just be like, oh my God, this is like such a joke, right? Like you can't feel that way about this. And I'm like, but I do.
Well, I don't want to invalidate your feelings. You can feel what you feel, but it's tough when it comes at me. So like cases like with this whole story where I'm frying
What?
some eggs, I'm making some eggs. You had a meeting earlier that day, so I'm having like a late breakfast. I'm frying some eggs, and you come in the kitchen, and we're kind of chit chatting, like just making my eggs, and I didn't spontaneously ask you about your meeting,
Mhm.
and you say I have to tell you I'm really hurt that you didn't ask me about the meeting, and I'm like. Wait, I'm just frying some eggs, having some chit chat about, whatever. I'm looking forward to eating these eggs. And that inadvertently was hurtful or offensive to you.
Right, because you were jibber jawing. I mean, for the women out there, you were jibber jawing. You're talking about your earlier meetings and your calls that you had had, and da da da. And you're talking about yourself, talking about yourself. You're hyper focused on your food and blah blah blah. And I'm like, I know that he knows I had this early morning meeting, and like, surely he's gonna ask me about it. Like, surely he's not gonna make me self-assert like, hey, the meeting was great because it feels good for someone to ask. And like you knew I had it, you knew I was excited about it. And so I'm like just waiting, waiting. And maybe that's a little bit on me, but I'm waiting, waiting, waiting for you to ask because I'm like, surely he's gonna ask, and that'll make me feel so seen and known and validated. And you never asked. And then I had to be like, oh man, like I thought you were gonna ask.
Well, and so that's a great reminder to go back to our last video because we talked about the challenge of mind reading. I like the idea of learning each other's love languages and being proactive in that. That's a learning skill for me that I'm still working on. Um, but we can't read minds.
Okay, but in that moment, when I said, "Hey, that hurt my feelings," for Mark and I to be emotionally compatible in that moment, instead of him getting hot and be like, "Are you joking? Like like that's ridiculous. Like you cannot be hurt by that." You could say, "Okay, like I hear that you're hurt. I hear that I could have asked. I am sorry. Will you forgive me?" Instead of getting big and puffing up and saying like, "You shouldn't feel that. Like, why do you feel that?"
I'm sorry that I didn't ask. Will you forgive me?
Yes.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. I'm working on it. Thanks, baby. All right. Anything else on the emotional
I
thing?
think we're good.
Cool. Okay. Number three. So review one, intellectual compatibility, two, emotional connectedness and compatibility, and three is sexual and physical compatibility.
Yep, so this one is a little more straightforward and not as nuanced. However, if you work with either of us one-on-one, Mark is your therapist or me as coach, or sometimes we work with couples two-on-two. I mean, this is a really tricky one if you're not aligned, and lots of people are not aligned in terms of level of interest or maybe type of sex or physical connection. But certainly, probably the one we see the most on the disconnect is frequency. Would you agree?
Frequency, it's tough. There's a broad spectrum. I mean, some people are actually okay, kind of, not really being sexual, whether it's, biologically a low sex drive. For some folks, it might be trauma that was a part of their life at some point. That the notion of physical touch or physical closeness may just not be appealing, and so that could create sort of a, obviously a dichotomy. We've talked before about touching. We said ABT, like always be touching. And so this idea of like just like, to have a physical connection like this that works for our love languages. We're very expressive like that. That can even be hard for some folks as well. And so again, whether it's nature, nurture, love language type, or biology, there can be lots of reasons that there
Mhm.
could be a disconnect. The hope is, though, again, in this notion of vulnerability and intimacy seeking, we can have candid conversations about that and be, kind of forthright to say, like, hey, I'd like us to work on ways that we can express love through physical touch or sexual intimacy. How can we do that? And it might literally be sex therapy. It might be, just sort of like a touch, open challenge. Hey, let's try to have like a, this week, let's make sure we kiss each other before we leave the house. Cool, simple
Or a
thing.
6 second kiss every day, like the Gottmans would suggest.
Yeah, like let's just kind of do a fun, open experiment like that to see if we're okay with getting a little more comfortable, kind of pushing the
Mhm.
envelope, cuddling, these sort of things. And then in terms of actually in sexual, encounters, to say, again, it's a great conversation if it is, mismatched with a therapist to say, how can we move closer to alignment?
Mhm.
And what would that look like? Again, because we want to respect people's backgrounds and trauma potential, it isn't just like you got to get in there and go do it more. It's what needs to happen for us to move more together with physical intimacy.
Yeah. And I mean, I will say the Gottmans do say, like, if there's not sexual alignment, like, if there's not sexual compatibility, and at least or an effort to work towards that, like, they are pretty candid that they don't think the marriage will work. Like, I've heard them say that. I'm just kind of like, yeah, if you're not aligned sexually and both parties are not willing to move towards one another in each other's preferences in terms of frequency or style or type or when it happens, and, um, that they're like, yeah, you're really in trouble because then that brings into this conversation what Simon Sinek was saying is like the only way to have a truly great relationship, as opposed to good or mediocre or vanilla, is to have all three of these swinging at the same time. Now, granted, I think he
No, you
did
don't have to be
say,
swingers. I'm not
okay,
saying you have to be a swinger, but is that what you're? No, no.
no. I was saying when they're all firing, like this is the path to like a truly epic relationship or
Oh,
marriage. Now he did say when you're good at all three, they can kind of wax, some of them can wax and wane because then you can maybe lean on the two others if like one of them's dropped a little bit or vice, like they can go back and forth. But to really have an epic relationship or marriage, which is what we want for everyone, that's what we feel like we're experiencing and feel so grateful for that to be married for the second time and really feel like we've got these three pillars of, when we're both in health, like a really exceptional, epic relationship between the two of us. And we want that for everyone. And so then he says, of course, like if you only have one or two that you're really, connected on intellectually, emotionally, or sexually, you can have a good relationship. It can be fine, like, and that's what I think a lot of us, especially in the US and our hyper culture of, individualism and a lot of the separateness that we're experiencing, like, is it you have to make the call for your life? Are you okay being in a marriage or relationship that's just good? Some people are. Some people like that's like we don't have the answer. However, I love part of my mission is to help people believe that if they're not in a truly great relationship or marriage, it can exist. Like if you don't want to settle for mediocrity, if you don't want to just be like, I'm good with just a good marriage and I'm fine that we are connected emotionally and intellectually, but not sexually, or sexually and intellectually, but not emotionally. I mean, we could probably give a version of, examples of couples that we know that have two, but not three. That's fine. But for people who want all three and would love to be, really in love and have an epic connection and marriage and relationship, like it is out there. It's possible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's also possible to build within your own marriage. So,
Yes.
so we can go from good to great. We certainly can build on that. And yeah, so I hope that this is a message of hope of like, yeah, things can get better, and hopefully, things can get better in your present state. But there's got to be the willingness to do the work, and so we
Mhm.
want to invite people into to doing the work to elevate
Mhm.
their life satisfaction. Life is short. We get one go around at this, and so let's be as intentional as possible to be as healthy as possible in all these categories so we can experience again that goal of intimacy and truly experience a loving, and enjoyable life together in our partnership.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, we're working on it. Thanks so much for checking this out, and we'll see you for our next episode. Have a
See you
great
next
day.
time.
Bye.